In 1927, Charles Lindbergh electrified the world by flying solo from New York's Roosevelt Field to Le Bourget Airfield outside Paris, France. His flight triggered what was to become known as the Golden Age of Aviation, a period of intense experimentation and public interest that extended to the beginning of World War II. In spite of popular worldwide interest during this period, aviation was yet to make a political impact in America. Congress was preoccupied with the direction the nation's economy was headed. It had little interest in promoting aircraft development. While there were some large aircraft manufacturers, the cutting edge of aviation technology was often left to experimenters in small, struggling shops around the country. Theories were tested through trial and error. Engineers, with few guidelines to follow, tried innovative designs that pushed the boundaries of aircraft design to the limits as they tried to meet the challenge of speed and distance, sometimes with fatal results. One means of stimulating development, as well as increasing public interest, was the national air races held during these golden years. Companies like Bendix, Thompson, Aero, Ford, Goodyear, Shell, and many others offered prize money that kept the spirit of aviation development alive. Without the promise of cash awards and recognition for innovation and daring, it would have been unlikely that America would have been in a position in the air to tackle the air menace that was growing in Europe during the period. Of the many small companies building competition airplanes, one firm and one design stands out to this day. The Granville Brothers Aircraft Company of Springfield, Massachusetts, had a profound effect on aviation. Their successful GB racers captured the public's attention and the world's admiration at the time as the fastest planes ever built in America. The designs that came off their drawing boards were trendsetters, a streamlined shape that heavily influenced other designers of the period. They set the shape of several of America's great fighters during World War II. The GB racers that the Granvilles built in the early 30s captured the imagination of millions. To this day, the image of the stubby little planes typifies that golden era. Unfortunately, over the years, aviation history writers have been unkind to the enthusiastic and talented men who produced some of the most remarkable aircraft ever built. Their sensational tales of hard luck and death have blurred the record of the Granvilles and their associates. What you are about to hear is the story of the GB airplanes, told by the people who were there.
Crowds watching a real show today, starting with Jimmy Doolittle, the human bullet.
Little plane belongs to the Springfield Air Racing Association, built by the Granville brothers in Springfield. In the next few minutes, we expect to make an attempt on the world speed record.
The story of the creative genius behind the GB racers begins in New England in the late 1920s. Zanford Granville, eldest of 5 brothers from a Madison, New Hampshire farming family, had moved to Boston several years earlier and started an automobile repair garage.
Well, my older brother, Zanford, started the organization. He started in the garage business. He was a very good mechanic and sort of a self-taught engineer. He had his own garage business at the age of 19. He became interested in aviation soon thereafter, and he started learning to fly at the East Boston Airport. And he worked at the airport to pay for the flying time, and I believe he got his pilot's license in 1925.
Zanford had a flair for mechanical things, and he soon found himself repairing airplanes at the East Boston Airport.
He then brought my next oldest brother, Tom, to Massachusetts to take over the garage so he could spend full time at the airport. Soon thereafter, he formed a company at the airport, which was called Granville Brothers Air Service. I joined him in 1927. We built a shop on the field on a truck chassis so they could move around because we weren't permitted to build a permanent structure. And we rented a basement of a shoe factory in which to do our major overhaul work. This went on for a year or two, and we gained quite a bit of experience overhauling the airplane of that day, and then decided that maybe we ought to build one of our own.
Zanford set up shop with his 4 brothers and coined the GB logo, which stood for the initials of Granville Brothers. Zanford was the guiding light and brought together an unusual array of talent. He marshaled the skills of his brothers and brought in top-notch engineering personnel to validate his creations. One of them, Bob Hall, was to play a pivotal role in the GB success.
He had been an engineer on Skyway's flying boat, and their boat was designed right in our office. We had a little office on Arlene Street in Boston in the corner of an abandoned shoe factory where we repaired airplanes. And Skyways had these 3 young fellows, all fresh out of college, that were designing the boat in our building, and we were building it. That was Bob Hall, Bob Air, and Bob Dexter.
Zanford had little formal education beyond the 8th grade, but was an intuitive engineer and worked well with Bob Hall. Zanford's innovative nature was evident from the very start in what was to become a continual string of improvements that would influence aviation design for decades.
And Zanford, Granny as we called him, designed this airplane, and we tried to introduce a lot of things and fixes for things that we felt were wrong aircraft of the day. And,
such as?
Well, for example, this airplane had flaps to lower the landing speed. We had releasable controls so the pilot could release the controls from the student in flight with just a twist of the stick. It had brakes, steerable brakes. It had a tail wheel. The top and bottom wings were interchangeable. The attachment fittings on the fuselage and various critical areas were equipped with universal joints to prevent serious damage. If a landing gear strut got bent, it wouldn't tear the fitting off the fuselage, and a lot of things like that we'd been repairing on other aircraft.
We had a sliding stick arrangement in it so 2 people could sit side by side without having a stick between their knees. And people used to fly an open cockpit in those days, and they could even use a robe in the wintertime to keep them freezing to death without interfering with those.
On May 3rd, 1929, at 5:30 in the morning, the new biplane was rolled out of the hangar.
We didn't want too many onlookers, so we assembled the airplane in the middle of the night and was ready to fly at 5:30 in the morning. And Granny took it off and made a flight around the field. The weather was extremely bad, but we were ready to fly, and we flew anyway. And it was very successful. And so then we started looking for a place to continue with our efforts with the hope to market the airplane.
Boston papers reported the GB Model P as the first successful aircraft built in that city. In late spring of 1929, Bob Granville sent letters to various cities in New England, trying to find someone interested in backing the fledgling company. They received an invitation from the 4 Tate brothers in Springfield, Massachusetts, to attend during the July 4th celebration. George, Harry, Frank, and James Tate operated a successful ice cream manufacturing business and had recently opened the Springfield Airport. Granny's plane caught the fancy of Lowell Bales, a barnstormer and part-time airline pilot operating out of Springfield, who was known for his flying skills. Bales was quite impressed with the plane, but he felt it needed a bit more power. At the time, the ship was powered by a Veli 55-horsepower 5-cylinder radial engine. A larger engine made a marked improvement and based on Bale's enthusiastic endorsement, the Tates offered to finance Zanford if he would move his operation from Boston to Springfield.
At the time that we moved in, it was the remains of a dance hall. It had a nice hardwood floor, which was nice to work on. It was just and the first thing we did was set up a line shaft, supposed to have power to run the tools, and brought some carpenters in and built some offices along the front of it. And started purchasing a few second-hand tools.
Mindless of the worsening economic situation in the country, Granville Brothers Aircraft enthusiastically began building planes based on the Model P design. They hired Bob Hall from Boston and made him chief engineer. He set about preparing the Model P for certification by the U.S. Department of Commerce. Eight of the biplanes sold easily, and the little company was on its way. But their op was to come to an abrupt end. In November, the 1929 stock market crash came. The aviation industry was one of the hardest hit. At the time, airplanes were more a plaything of the rich. There was little interest in buying airplanes. Times were hard.
I think this is what led us into the racing end of the business. At about that time, I think early 30, we heard about the All-American Derby. I think it was sponsored by the Cirrus Engine Company. There was quite a lot of money for the prizes involved, and some of us had been toying with the idea of building a small plane for a plaything anyway, and we went on with that to build a plane, Cirrus American Derby.
Hoping at a chance to win some of the prize money being offered, Bob Hall encouraged Granny to build a plane specifically for the Cirrus Derby. The Model X began to take form. Driven by a Cirrus 90-horsepower engine, the ship had a top speed of 140 miles per hour. Lowell Bales was chosen to fly the Model X, and everyone's hopes ran high.
It was a long, really tough race, about 55, I think it was 5,541 miles they called it, and it was almost completely around the country, the United States.
It was really, it could be called a reliability tour, couldn't it?
Yes, that was what it was really for, was to prove the reliability of Cirrus engines. Cirrus put up the money for the racing. And there was quite a few standard airplanes in it, like 3 or 4 Great Lakes biplanes, for instance. But Command Air built a special airplane for it.
Lee Gelbach in the Command Air finished first, but the GB Model X with Lowell Bales aboard finished second and first among what was to become a production airplane called the GB Sportster.
The Command Air, but I guess it was kind of tough to fly too, and it was a little bit faster, I guess, than the GB. But they fought it out between them. They were ahead of everybody else all through the race, both of them. Sometimes one ahead and sometimes the other.
I understand they were good friends, Gelbach and Bales.
Yeah, they were excellent friends. 2 mighty wonderful pilots. And Bales really advertised the GB quite a bit, because every night when he came in to land, he would put on a little aerobatic show before he sat down. Gelbach was usually too tired, and I don't know whether he could have done it with a rocket anyway or not, but...
Oh, you mean as Bales hopped from city to city, he would do that?
Yeah.
Oh, during the race, during the
yeah, they had a schedule from city to city to city, day by day, and when he came in to land, why, he just come down to the airport and roll her up over a few times.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well...
And that really, a lot of people saw it and liked it.
I know when Bales returned, he landed at Westfield so that the Springfield Flyers could come over and escort him home.
That's right.
That really put the name GB on the aviation map, don't you think?
Yes, it did. Certainly did. Also Lowell Bales. Everybody knew Lowell Bales in the country after that.
Were you able to sell the Sportsters? In other words, were there enough wealthy individuals to
Well,
keep you going?
There was enough to sell a few. The first two, Bales bought himself. He bought the ship that he flew in the Derby. He loved it, and as soon as he got back, he acquired it, and then he joined forces with Roscoe Britton, and they went on barnstorming tours all over the East Coast, and using that to draw the crowds with. Bales could even bring it in on its back and roll it and land it, and that drew a crowd.
And anywhere you drew a crowd, you, of course, made more famous the name GB.
Yeah.
Everybody came to know what they were.
We, at Boston, we took care of Harvard Flying Club's airplane, and two young fellows who flew them a lot was George Rand and Harold Moon, and they both came to Springfield and bought Sportsters immediately after that. So that was our first two Sportsters.
And these two fellows weren't from Springfield, so they took their Sportsters out of the Springfield area, is that right?
Rand was from New York and Moon was from Philadelphia.
The inline Sportsters continued to evolve. Some fitted with Cirrus engines, others with the 125 horsepower Monasco. The Model D rolled out in 1931 and sported a fully faired landing gear which was to become standard on all future GB aircraft. But Granny and Hall felt the real future lay in a radial engine design. Without exception, the Warner-powered Sportster series brought favorable comments from their owners regarding handling and performance. Zanford Granville was always thinking of ways to improve his planes and thought a two-seat version of the popular Sportster might appeal to the commercial buyer with a need for high-speed transport. The new ship was designed to handle a radial engines, and the first plane was fitted with the big 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney Wasp engine. Designated the Model Y, the first senior Sportster proved to be everything Granny hoped for. The powerful two-seater was painted white with bright red trim. One pilot who was attracted to this superb ship was Maud Tate, daughter of James, one of the brothers who owned Springfield Airport. Maud was the first woman in all of New England to hold a transport license. And in 1929, flying an autogyro, she set an unofficial altitude record for women of 16,500 feet. Maud loved to fly. She was soon drawn from her teaching job in nearby East Longmeadow to fly full-time. The Depression dragged on. Money remained scarce. To keep the business, Granny and Bob Hall began eyeing the prize money being offered at America's biggest aerial show, the National Air Races, coming up in Cleveland in just a few months.
It was quite a lot of money, the National Air Races, and Granny and Bob Hall, between them, decided we ought to have some of it. So, actually, when it was really decided to build the city of Springfield, we only had a little over 2 months before the race.
As good as the Sportsters were, Granny and Hall both felt something different was needed. What came off the drawing boards was the Model Z, designed to excel at one job: go fast and win races. The Z carried through the radial engine design of the successful senior Sportster. The setback cockpit created an optical illusion, and many critics claimed the fuselage was too short for goal and that the tail surfaces were too small. The wings used a relatively new airfoil designed by an aeronautical engineer named Monk, who published his theories in a series of articles in Aero Digest magazine in the early 30s. Hall chose a thinned reflex design which limited the travel of the center of lift as the wing passed through the air at various angles of attack. This also allowed the use of minimum tail surfaces to reduce weight and drag. The same airfoil design elements are used to a degree on the French-British Concorde and most Delta Wing aircraft today. With only 6 weeks before the race and money tight, everyone plunged into the project with enthusiasm. For the engine, Bob Hall drew on his contacts at Pratt & Whitney, at that time a small engine manufacturer in nearby Hartford. Pratt & Whitney was impressed with Hall's ideas. They were also eager to publicize their engines, and in the spirit of cooperation for their mutual benefit, agreed to loan the Granvilles a supercharged Wasp Junior engine.
This was a Wasp Junior, or often known as a R985, an engine normally at that time of 300 horsepower, but which was allowed to go to 535 horsepower.
Pratt & Whitney would grow into a world leader in aircraft engines over the coming years. During World War II, they would provide over 50% of the power for Allied air forces around the globe. Money was still needed to run the business, and Bob Hall and Granny formed what was called the Springfield Air Racing Association. The plan was to raise money from businessmen, as well as private investors in the field area.
You see, when the Springfield Air Racing Association had to be formed in order to raise money to build this airplane. I'd design the airplane in the morning and go out in the afternoon and pound the pavement to all the big companies in Springfield and say, hey, come on, buy some shares, $100 a share. And sold about $5,000 worth, which was enough to build this airplane. And the reason it was enough is because we got so much from the manufacturers without having to pay for it, like the engine. Pratt & Whitney lent us the engine. Curtiss Propeller built us a special propeller, absolutely custom designed and built for this airplane. No charge. We got the wheels, tires, brakes, flying wires, some of the instruments, all for nothing, without which we couldn't possibly have done it for the money that we were able to raise by the Springfield Air Racing Association.
In 6 short weeks, the Model Z was completed. The little black and yellow ship, christened the City of Springfield, was ready for its maiden flight. Saturday, August 22nd, 1931. It was Bob Hall's 26th birthday. The plan was to take off from Springfield and land at nearby Bowles Field, just across the Connecticut River. Hall wasn't sure about the plane's landing speed, and to be safe, he wanted to use Bowles' longer runway.
It didn't go very fast, you know. I didn't push it one bit the first flight. All I wanted to do was to get it in the air and get it back on the ground safely. So I didn't open it up at all. I think what somebody said it was like 155 miles an hour is all the fast I went on that first flight. But I flew it long enough so that I knew that it was perfectly all right, and went over to Bowles Field and landed it. And then we started finding out a few things that had to be fixed a little bit. And I thought it was a fine flying airplane. I really had no problems with it at all whatsoever. Of course, it was very light it was light on the rudder. So light that in order to feel it, I flew in my stocking feet after the first flight.
The Thompson Trophy Race, the premier event of the National Air Races in Cleveland, was just days away. It was a 100-mile dash around pylons for aircraft of unlimited engine size. Bob Hall took off for Cleveland by way of Buffalo, where he and Lowell Bales would take turns flying the Z over Labor Day. Bales had invested $500 to help build the Z in return for the right to fly it in the Thompson Trophy Race. It was an exciting time for the Granvilles.
It was very exciting. When we got there, we had 2 airplanes with about 2 feet of wing cut off of them, which we had to get flying. And of course, we had a few men there before I got there. Mark and Ed, I guess, were both there. And Hall had, in one of the races, Hall had clipped a water tower and took about 3 feet off the end of the senior wing, which had to be repaired overnight. And almost the same thing happened to one of the Sportsters when somebody taxed it into it.
How did the public take to this stubby little plane of unusual design that made every military aircraft in the world obsolete the moment it took off?
A lot didn't believe that a low-wing airplane could take a tight pylon turn, and they figured the biplanes would have a big advantage on that, and everybody thought Doolittle would probably win the race. And it's possible he might have had he had engine trouble. They were very close on speed. Doolittle had a good ship, there's no doubt about that, and he's a great pilot.
Jimmy Doolittle was just one of many who took part in the 1931 races, whose lives would be brought together in a more intense competition of global dimensions, World War II. Jimmy Doolittle would lead the raid on Tokyo and bolster Allied morale in the early days of the war. Bob Hall would test fly and contribute significantly to the design of some of the best fighter planes for our Navy. General Ira Ika, who, among other aviation achievements, would head up the U.S. 8th Air Force in England during World War II. And there was German aerobatic performer and World War I ace Ernst Udet, who would become known as the father of the Luftwaffe, Germany's emerging air force. At Cleveland, the Z caught Udet's eye, and he expressed his admiration of the little plane to Bob Hall in a rather unusual way. Udet never fully accepted Hitler's image of the New World Order and would fall into disfavor with the German government and commit suicide shortly after the war began. The performance of the Model Z was nothing short of sensational. In each of the 5 races it was entered in, the little black and yellow ship walked away from the pack to take the checkered flag. In the straightaway Shell Speed Dash, sponsored by Shell Oil, Bales set a new American speed record of 267.34 miles an hour. Then, with the Thompson Trophy race just hours away, engine trouble developed.
The NEA set up that particular morning, which was the same day that Thompson was going to be flown, for him to run his attempt at the world speed record, which was a very poor day to do it. And he flew several laps at full throttle, and he had motor trouble, had to land, and he brought it in. Pratt Whitney had at least one, I think 2 good mechanics there. And my brother Mark and those boys from Pratt Whitney went right to work on it, tear it down. And they had at least 1 cylinder and 2 or 3 pistons that were ruined.
And they had to change those right before race time. Right
before the race. It was happened about 10 o'clock in the morning. The race come off, I don't know exactly, 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Pratt Whitney had the ladder to fix it with, and had some good men, and they put it back together, and they fired her up about noontime, and Mark sat right in the cockpit and run that thing in from the time that it was ready to start until Bales got into it to wheel it out on the field.
Yeah, I've read that. They never shut her down. After
Never
they put the new pistons in, they never shut her down until Bales left the starting line.
And Bales said she picked up revs every single lap all the way through the race, no problems whatever.
The Granville entourage made out well in 1931 national air races. The Model Z won 5 races in all. Meanwhile, Bob Hall finished 4th in the Thompson Trophy race in the Model Y. Maud Tate set a new ladies' speed record in the Model Y by winning the Aerol Trophy, the premier event for women pilots. Another grand achievement for one of the country's outstanding aviatrix. Springfield went wild as their heroes came home.
It sure did.
They cleaned up. And
I forgot exactly, but I think it was up around $17,000 in all. And had the senior sports still loaded the front cockpit full of trophies when he came home to Springfield with them. Yeah, it really was a big thing for a little outfit. I remember it very distinctly. The airplanes all come in, and there was a mob at Springfield Airport, and then the city put on a banquet that night. It was really... Everybody that was able to made a speech. Granny made a pretty good speech, giving the credit to the boys who worked their heads off to get the airplane built in time.
On a practical note, the more than $17,000 of prize money, a very tidy sum in the 1930s, assured Granville Brothers Aircraft would remain in business. It also meant a 100% dividend paid to the jubilant investors of the Springfield Air Racing Association. In spite of the GB success, no one had money to buy airplanes. In order to keep busy, Granny took the opportunity to explore several design concepts. One of them was a canard, or tail-first design. Granny's design was influenced by Germany's Focke-Wulf Ante, a twin-engine canard with tricycle landing gear. He dubbed his the Ascender, notable as a very rare example of an American design of this type during the period, a design concept that's being explored in great depth today. With business slack and no end to their money problems, Bob Hall decided to go on his own. He left the Granvilles to form his own company just across the river at Bowles Airport in Agawam, Massachusetts.
Bob was an ambitious young man and a very capable young man, and he decided that he would go on his